I never imagined I would walk through the heavy oak doors of my late mother-in-law's house again. The walls seemed taller than I remembered, the smell of lavender polish still clinging to the air like a ghost of her presence. My daughter Emma held my hand tightly, her small steps echoing against the marble floor. She didn't remember much about her grandmother. She had been too young when illness had taken her away, but she knew enough to sense the weight of this gathering. The study was crowded. Dark furniture, shelves stacked with leather-bound books, and the long polished table where the family now gathered. Faces I hadn't seen in years sat around it. My husband's brothers with their stiff ties, their wives whispering behind manicured hands, cousins dressed in black but with eyes glittering in anticipation. I could feel it immediately. This wasn't about mourning. It was about money. The lawyer sat at the head of the table, unfolding papers with precise, mechanical movements. The rustle of the parchment was the loudest sound in the room until he began to read. Each name was called with solemn formality, each grandchild listed with a generous sum or a treasured heirloom. Applause and relieved laughter followed every announcement, as though the inheritance was less about remembrance and more about victory. I felt Emma's hand squeeze mine. Her eyes shone wide with expectation. She believed, with a child's pure heart, that she too would be remembered, that her grandmother's love would be written in ink. But then came the silence. The lawyer cleared his throat and closed the folder. "That concludes the will," he said. The room shifted instantly. Chairs scraped, voices overlapped, cousins already discussing how they would spend their share. No one noticed the little girl staring in confusion. Emma tugged on my sleeve, her voice barely a whisper. "Mom, what about me?" I couldn't speak. The lawyer adjusted his glasses uncomfortably. "I'm sorry, Emma. Your grandmother didn't leave anything for you." His words were soft, but they cut like steel. A ripple of whispers spread across the room. Someone chuckled. I caught the sound of one cousin muttering, "Guess she wasn't really considered family." Another leaned back with a smirk, as if the absence of Emma's name confirmed what they had always wanted to believe, that she didn't belong. I felt the heat rise in my face. Memories flooded in. Emma sitting by her grandmother's bedside, reading fairy tales in her tiny voice, braiding strands of silver hair, planting shy kisses on her frail hand. No other grandchild had been there in those long, lonely nights. And yet here we were, her name erased, her love ignored. Emma's small hand slipped from mine. She looked down at her lap, her shoulders rigid. Around us, the laughter grew louder, careless. Someone raised a glass of water as if to toast their fortune. Another snapped a photo of the will to send to friends. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drag my daughter out of that suffocating room. But my feet felt rooted, heavy with a strange mix of rage and sorrow. The house, once filled with my mother-in-law's stern affection, seemed colder now. Her portraits on the wall stared down at us, lips pressed in silence. For the first time, I wondered if the woman I thought had cared for Emma had hidden feelings I never noticed. The lawyer gathered his papers. "If there are no further questions." But Emma wasn't finished. She lifted her head, her eyes wet but burning with something fierce. Slowly, almost ceremonially, she pushed her chair back. The scrape of wood against marble silenced the room more effectively than any gavel. Every head turned toward the smallest person in the study. And in that moment, I realized this story wasn't going to end in silence. The silence that followed Emma's name being absent from the will weighed heavier than any words. It wasn't the kind of silence filled with respect or grief. It was the silence of satisfaction, of people finding confirmation for what they already believed. Around the table, my in-laws shifted in their chairs, some leaning back smugly, others exchanging glances that spoke louder than voices ever could. I sat frozen, my hand resting uselessly on the table, my knuckles white against the polished wood. Emma sat beside me, still staring at the lawyer as if he had made some kind of mistake. I wanted to believe it too, that he had simply skipped a line, misread a page, that any moment now he would correct himself. But the folder was closed, the pen placed neatly on top, and with that gesture, Emma's name was erased from the record. I watched her small shoulders rise and fall with quick, shallow breaths. She looked around the table, her eyes lingering on the cousins who were already chatting excitedly about what they would buy, their laughter a cruel reminder of how quickly children can become greedy when handed power. No one looked at Emma. To them, she was invisible, just a shadow at the table. Pang of memory stabbed me. I saw her sitting at her grandmother's bedside months ago, reading fairy tales she barely understood herself. her little voice carrying stories into a room heavy with illness. I remembered how she would brush her grandmother's thin hair, careful not to hurt her, while the others stayed away, too busy, too distracted. Those moments had been real. They had been love. And yet none of it mattered here. I felt the heat of shame rising, not because Emma had been forgotten, but because I had brought her here to witness it. I had believed, foolishly, that her grandmother's love would shine through, that her presence would be honored. Instead, my daughter was learning a harsher lesson, that love is not always measured in words, and family is not always fair. Around us, the room returned to its rhythm. Glasses clinked, chairs shifted, pens scribbled on napkins as people calculated sums. It was as though nothing had happened at all. Nothing except for the girl sitting quietly beside me. Her eyes no longer hopeful but hardening into something new. I wanted to tell her that money didn't matter, that we didn't need it, that love was more important than any inheritance. But the words felt hollow in my mouth because I knew the truth. This wasn't about money. It was about belonging, about recognition, about being seen. I looked down at Emma. Her small hands were folded neatly in her lap, but her jaw was set, her gaze steady on the table in front of her. She was too quiet, too still. And I knew her silence would not last long. The moment came without warning. 1 second, the room buzzed with chatter and laughter. The next, the scrape of Emma's chair against the marble floor cut through it like a blade. Heads turned, conversations froze. Even the lawyer looked startled, his pen slipping from his fingers as he straightened in his chair. Emma stood, small but unwavering. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at the cousins or the aunts or the smirking uncles. She lifted her chin and spoke into the silence with a voice steadier than I had ever heard from her. She loved me the most. 5 words. That was all. But they hit the room harder than any speech ever could. The laughter that had filled the air evaporated instantly. One cousin's smirk faltered. An aunt looked down at her hands, suddenly unable to meet Emma's gaze. The silence now was different. It was not one of greed or satisfaction, but of unease, of guilt. Emma's eyes didn't waver. She stood in the center of the storm she had created, her small frame casting a shadow longer than anyone expected. And in that moment I saw something shift. It was as if she had pulled a thread loose from the fabric of the room, unraveling the comfortable lies that had been woven into this family for years. I sat motionless, my heart pounding in my chest. I should have stood, should have gone to her, but I couldn't. I was transfixed by her courage, by the quiet power of her words. Around the table, no one spoke. The cousins who had mocked her moments before now fidgeted with their napkins. An uncle cleared his throat, but the sound died quickly in the heavy air. Emma's lips pressed into a thin line, but her eyes shone with defiance. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She simply told the truth, the kind of truth that needed no defense. And in those 5 words, my daughter had done what I could not. She had claimed her place, not in the will, not in the money, but in the memory of a love that no paper could erase. The stillness after Emma's words stretched long, like the heavy pause before thunder. I could feel the tension ripple across the room. Some of the cousins shifted uncomfortably. Their earlier smugness drained away. One of them tapped nervously on the table, pretending to be absorbed in the grain of the wood. Others avoided looking at Emma altogether, as though eye contact would force them to acknowledge the truth she had spoken. I sat frozen, both proud and terrified. A 10-year-old had stood against a room of adults who thrived on power and appearances. I had seen grown men buckle under the pressure of this family, yet here she was, standing as if the weight of their judgment meant nothing. Someone finally spoke. My sister-in-law, her voice brittle with false sweetness. "She's just a child," she said, her smile too wide, her tone forced. "She doesn't understand how wills work, how decisions are made." But I noticed how her hands twisted in her lap, betraying her nerves. Emma didn't reply. She simply tilted her chin higher, her silence louder than words. It was unbearable for them, I could see it. The way truth unspoken hung heavier than accusations. Then one of the uncles muttered, "Well, perhaps the grandmother had her reasons. Perhaps she didn't see fit to leave anything for." He stopped when I finally stood. The scrape of my chair echoed as sharp as Emma's had. My voice was steady, though my hands trembled at my sides. She had reasons, yes, but none of them were about worth. You all know Emma was the one who visited, The one who sat by her bedside when the rest of you were too busy counting your hours and your money. She may not be in that document, but she is in every memory of that woman's final days. A hush fell again. I could feel the portraits on the wall staring down at us, silent witnesses. For the first time, shame began to spread in their expressions. They weren't ready to argue, not because they believed me, but because they knew I was right. Emma slowly reached into her small pocket. Her fingers curled around something hidden, and then she brought it out, wrapped in a thin square of tissue paper. She unfolded it carefully like a sacred ritual, and held up a silver hairpin. Old, tarnished, delicate, but still beautiful. "She gave this to me," Emma said softly, her voice steady now. "The night before the hospital. She said, 'Keep this safe. It's yours because you listened to my stories.'" The room gasped, not loud but collective. Even the lawyer leaned forward to see, his face softening. It was undeniable. This wasn't a trinket Emma had stolen from a drawer. This was a gift passed down with intent, with love, with meaning. A grandmother's whisper etched into metal. I remembered that night clearly. Emma climbing into bed beside her grandmother, clutching a book, reading until she fell asleep mid-sentence. I had found her curled against that frail figure, the hairpin gleaming faintly on the bedside table. I hadn't realized its weight then. Now I did. The cousins' chatter dissolved into silence. Some flushed with shame, others looked away entirely. One of the aunts dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. I realized then that money could never buy what Emma held in her palm, proof of love that no legal paper could erase. I felt a swell of pride so deep it made my throat ache. My daughter hadn't just spoken words. She had shown them evidence, undeniable and pure, of where she truly stood in this family. The atmosphere shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No one leapt to confess their guilt. No one fell to their knees in apology. But there was a subtle change in the way they looked at her. Less dismissal, less mockery. A few pairs of eyes softened, guilt flickering where arrogance had once lived. One uncle, usually the loudest voice of authority, cleared his throat. Perhaps the will did not reflect everything. Perhaps children carry legacies in ways we adults forget. His words were vague, but in this family, even a small concession was monumental. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "The will is binding," he said, almost apologetically. "But it does not erase relationships." His gaze lingered on Emma, and I could tell even he was moved. Emma sat down at last, her shoulders relaxing, the hairpin resting gently in her hands. She looked at me with the faintest smile, not triumphant but calm. It was as though she had carried a burden into the room and set it down for everyone to see. I squeezed her hand beneath the table. Pride radiated through me, sharper than any anger I had felt earlier. She hadn't fought for money or approval. She had fought for truth. And in doing so, she had changed the balance in that room forever. We left soon after. The others lingered, some whispering, some pretending to be busy with the paperwork. But the air was different now. They could no longer dismiss her. They could no longer erase her. Outside, the evening air was cool, carrying the scent of pine from the old trees that lined the property. I inhaled deeply, trying to release the bitterness that had clung to me inside. Emma walked beside me, holding the hairpin as if it were a crown. "Are you all right?" I asked quietly as we reached the car. She nodded, her gaze steady on the small object in her hand. "I don't care about the money, Mom. I just wanted them to remember." Tears welled in my eyes. "They will. Because of you." We drove home in silence, but it was a different silence. No longer heavy with exclusion but filled with peace. Streetlights washed over us, and for the first time in years, I felt a strange lightness, as if some invisible chain had broken. That night, Emma placed the hairpin under her pillow. I kissed her forehead and watched her drift to sleep, her face calm, her breathing soft. Lying in my own bed, I realized something. Inheritance is not measured in property or sums written on paper. It's measured in memory, in love, in courage. And by those measures, Emma had received more than anyone else in that room. She had claimed her rightful place, not through ink and signatures, but through truth spoken at the perfect moment. And as her mother, I knew one thing for certain. She would never again be invisible.